Welcome to this video tutorial with Virtual Racing School in the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup on Iracing. This week we visit Phillip Island in Australia, where as ever I'll be looking at a lap from Rens Broekman, who has driven in default afternoon weather to match the official series. I'll play the lap through in full for you first before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was 1 minute 32.503. Okay then, so as ever, starting from the list of data packs on the VRS website, we're going to choose the Porsche Iracing Cup data pack as driven by Rens Broekman. I'm going to scroll down to week 11, which is Phillip Island, and select that, which will load up the session details, where you can see stint data, the lap files to download, the replay, and of course the race setup. We're just going to click on Learn Track, which is going to load up the driving analyzer, and it will start to play the lap through. I'm just going to pause that, and if you've not seen this before, you've got an overlay with your steering angle trace, a speed trace, both of course through the duration of the lap, as well as a brake and throttle input trace, and some live driving input, so you can see exactly what Rens has driven over the lap. So I'm just going to click on Sector 1, which is the run from the start finish line to the braking zone for turn 1. So I'm also going to mute it and slow it down to half speed. So obviously bringing the car gradually over to the left hand side, you want the widest possible entry into turn 1, which is Duin corner. And we did just pass a braking reference there on the circuit. There is a painted white line across the track, which also correlates with this 200 marker board just over here in the distance. So just after you pass there, that's going to be your braking point for turn 1. So as with most of the corners on this circuit, they're very long. You need to brake very early. You don't want to be too aggressive. You just want to tease the speed down and keep the weight on the front tyres to avoid understeer. That's very important. So as we can see here, Rens is braking quite gently, and as soon as he turns in, he bleeds off the brakes more and more. In 5th gear, very fast corner, but notice here, so this is very important, he never lets go of the brake more than 20%, so he's always got at least 20% pressure all the way up until the point where he picks up the throttle again, and that keeps the car loaded at the front end and eliminates or reduces certainly any understeer on entry. And then he sort of on the exit, to overcome the front end getting light, he gets on the power really quite firmly, and that puts him right on the edge of traction at the rear end and continues that rotation again. So it's all about reducing understeer, and reaches full throttle fairly soon, but doesn't reach full throttle immediately. So it's that first 60 or 70% that you need to be quite hard and then just modulate and feel for the grip, and obviously try and use all the track, open the car up, and you could, I guess, sacrifice a bit of exit speed here to give yourself a better entry into turn 1, but really it's more about speed rather than position, because turn 1 is kind of a double apex anyway. So you want to brake nice and early for this. There's no real reference here, but if you brake too late, then you can sort of get away with it by braking a bit harder and taking a slightly wider line on entry, and if you brake too early, you can just brake very gently and carry the speed in. So you don't need to be spot on with your brake point here. So either way, Rens is very gentle on the brakes, only about 30%. That keeps the car nice and tight, and this is essentially his first apex. So he's still slowing the car down as the car moves back away from the inside of the corner. It's quite banked as well in the middle, and then as he picks up the throttle again, that characteristic firm initial application immediately as he stops braking, so no coasting at all. The car has already started to retighten, and that's when you want to get back on the power. And then it's very much about just modulating, feeling for the grip, because the car should rotate quite nicely now. And this is going to be your second apex, so you want to get nice and low on that curb, avoiding running too low into the gravel. And then there's a little bit of a bump there as the curb ends, and then just after that, feel for the grip, a little bit of oversteer. You can see that in the steering trace, some corrections, but these are quite small angles. They're very minor slides on the limit of adhesion. So you can see that he's also reached full throttle when he has this this little oversteer moment, but yeah, gets away with it just fine, and runs the car out onto the exit curb as well. So really just try and carry as much speed as possible down towards the hairpin. Obviously keep the car nice and tight down here. You want to listen for the rumble strip there on the left, and then braking is going to be just before this marker. This is the 150 marker, or rather just before the curb begins on the left hand side. This is the biggest braking zone on the circuit, and you want to keep the car nice and straight on the limit of threshold braking. Now I can see here that Rens brakes a little bit gently initially, and as a result has to brake a little bit harder later on. So you can probably brake a tiny bit later if you brake harder initially, but it's touch and go. It's all about finding that threshold where the tyres are on the verge of lock-up, but no more. And we can just see a little bit of a lock-up. We can see the lock-up light there, and a bit of oversteer as he's also presumably locked up the rear tyres ever so slightly. So the car's a little bit sideways here, but a small correction, and he's absolutely fine and still manages to hit his apex nicely. So no serious time lost there at all. And so halfway around the hairpin then picks up the throttle, and you need a lot of patience here. You are quite heavily traction limited. It's a very slow corner, so you can't get on the power too quickly. So control it, modulate, feel for the grip, a little bit of oversteer again on the exit, but nothing too dramatic, and open the car up using all of the track, of course, for your acceleration, and then back over to the right hand side, and just after this curb on the right ends, that's going to be your braking zone into turn 6. Now this is a very heavily banked corner again, but it also requires a late apex for the best exit, so don't turn in too soon, keep the brakes on, keep the car rotating, and finally get close to that curb just on the exit. Now one thing about a late apex corner is typically you tend to be able to be on the power early, and that's really the goal. So as soon as the car starts to retighten and you can feel that you're getting closer to that exit curb, you can pick up the throttle at that point. So this is well before his, let's call it a geometrical apex. So he's actually closest to the apex now, and he's already well into the throttle at that point, and reaches full throttle before the exit, and then keeps the car nice and straight. Avoid dropping wheels into the grass or gravel there on the exit. That's very important. So over to the left hand side now. You want to open up the next right hander as much as possible, and to the extent that Rens actually even goes out wide onto the rumble strip on the entry. And I guess he's trying to get through here as close to flat out as possible, but still has a slight lift. And I would argue maybe it's not quite a big enough lift, because as we can see, he gets away with it, but he has to have a pretty big lift, and he's understeering quite severely at this point. And like I said, gets away with it, but he's pretty close to the grass there on the exit. So pretty much as soon as you've done that, as soon as you've reached that exit curb, you want to be thinking about braking up into the Lukey Heights turn 9, sector 6, and again, brake very early, let's say, and very gently. So you just want to tease the car down in speed, keeping the car nice and tight. You do not want to lock up here at all. And I guess you can call it a double apex as well. This is his first apex. The car's gonna run away from the edge ever so slightly, but he does quite a good job actually of keeping the car nice and tight. He wouldn't be able to do that if he was later on the brakes. It's very important to not be too late on the brakes into any of these corners, but especially the faster ones, so that you can keep the line nice and tight and avoid understeer. So you can see here that he picks up the throttle again quite firmly, and as the car goes light, which it will do as the circuit crests, he's modulating and feathering the throttle to avoid inducing a horrible slide as the rear end of the car goes light. And he does actually reach full throttle briefly before then braking down the hill. Now you notice again there's a little bit of a bump or another crest down the hill, and that's where he comes off the brakes, but he starts braking just as the first crest has happened and the car starts going down the hill. This is well before the 50 marker. So another quite slow corner down into second gear, and it's really important to hook up with your apex. You want to brake all the way into the apex, and especially there, notice how he kept slowing the car down so the car retightened. That's quite important, and that allows him to be nice and tight exiting and hug this curb on the right hand side there whilst applying the throttle, which then opens up the left hander, which is very important as an acceleration zone into the last corner. So just feather out of the throttle as you turn in, and completely lifting off there is Rens briefly in third gear. And then this is very much just about feeling the car for grip, trying to modulate, trying to just wait for the traction. So he's kind of sustaining about 70% throttle through here. And there's a little bit of oversteer correction there, but he doesn't panic, keeps the throttle maintained, collects it with some counter steer, and basically as soon as you feel that you've got enough track on the exit to work with, you commit to full throttle as he's done so now. And then hopefully you'll be pretty close to this exit curb, but not onto the grass. So that's pretty much right on the limit. That's very, very nice. And then off the curb, having a lift and also a squeeze on the brakes. It's not really to slow the car down, but more to just tuck the nose in and get the entry, get the car turned in and rotating. Because as soon as he's finished with braking, he picks up the throttle quite firmly initially, straight to about 80%, and then is really patient here, because you don't want to commit to full throttle too early, but you do want to be as early as possible so you carry as much speed as possible down the start-finish straight. And he's committed now and opens the car up and is right up onto this exit curb, which we can see using all of the track, as much speed as possible down this straight. Now it's worth me pointing out, I think Rens should probably recalibrate his brakes, because we can see it's hovering around 1%. Now I don't think this cost him too much lap time, but it might have been a few hundredths, unfortunately, because so it's only really in this last sector that I've noticed it. But I just wanted to point that out for you guys in case you didn't realise. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-on-one tuition with world champions from the likes of Koanda Simsport. Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.